There's a number that almost every American is told they need to reach before they're allowed to feel free. $1 million. The financial industry built an entire culture around it. The first million is the finish line. The first million is when wealth becomes automatic. The first million is when the fear goes away. But that's not what the data shows. And it's not what people who study the psychology of money actually find. By the time most people reach $1 million invested, the deepest psychological transformation has already happened. The fear didn't leave at 7 figures. It left somewhere much earlier, somewhere quiet, somewhere unspectacular, somewhere most people walked past without realizing they were walking through the most important door of their financial lives. You are probably closer to financial freedom than you've been told. Not because the numbers are bigger than you think, but because freedom, the real kind, the kind that changes how you sleep, doesn't begin at $1 million. It begins at the exact moment the fear starts to fade, and that moment costs a lot less than you've been led to believe. If this is the kind of conversation about money you want more of, the honest kind, the kind that doesn't try to sell you anything, subscribe. That's the only ask. Let's keep going. Let's start with the data, because this matters. In 2025, the Bank of America Institute found that nearly 24% of American households were living paycheck to paycheck. LendEdu's 2025 Personal Finance Survey put the number even higher. 53% of Americans said their income runs out before the month does. And the Federal Reserve's most recent survey of household economics and decision-making found that 37% of American adults could not handle a $400 surprise expense in cash. $400, a car repair, a vet bill, a trip to urgent care. That's not a story about bad budgeting. That's the architecture of an entire generation living one phone call away from financial chaos. And what happens to a person who lives that way for years isn't just economic, it's biological. Princeton researchers Sendil Mullainathan and Eldar Shafir found that when people are under chronic financial pressure, their cognitive capacity drops by an amount roughly equivalent to losing an entire night of sleep. Every day. As long as the scarcity continues. Financial stress doesn't just hurt. It makes you worse at thinking, worse at planning, worse at noticing the very opportunities that could change your situation. This is the prison most people are quietly living inside of. A low hum of cognitive exhaustion they've started to mistake for their personality. And this is why the idea that you need $1 million to feel free is one of the cruelest myths in modern financial culture. Because by the time you reach 7 figures, the prison has already been escaped. The freedom didn't start at the million, it started the moment the door cracked open. Financial freedom isn't a single moment, it's a series of shifts that happen at very specific dollar amounts, most of them dramatically lower than $1 million. Today we walk through the first 3, the ones almost no one talks about, the ones that change the most. The first phase doesn't look like wealth. From the outside, nothing has changed. You still go to the same job, you still drive the same car, you still pay the same rent. But something inside you has shifted in a way that's almost impossible to describe to someone who hasn't felt it. This phase begins somewhere around $3,000 to $5,000 saved. Not invested, just saved. Sitting in a high-yield savings account, quietly earning 4 or 5% in today's rate environment. To someone who has lived their entire life on the edge, swiping the card and hoping it goes through, those first few $1,000s are not a number. They're a feeling. For the first time, you walk into a grocery store and you don't add up the items in your head as you put them in the cart. For the first time, when your check engine light comes on, the panic doesn't arrive. Because somewhere in the back of your mind, you know, you have something. Not much, but something. Here's why this matters more than the industry lets on. When a person lives in chronic financial scarcity, their body produces elevated cortisol, the stress hormone. Long-term elevated cortisol is associated with cardiovascular disease, weakened immunity, disrupted sleep, and depression. A 2025 report citing the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation found that working-class Americans under chronic financial pressure are dying meaningfully earlier than wealthier Americans, and the gap is widening. Financial scarcity isn't just a financial condition. It's a slow-acting medical one. It compresses your life expectancy. So when you save your first $3,000, you're not just building a buffer. You're walking out of a low-grade chemical hostage situation that's been running in your bloodstream for years. Your cortisol drops, your sleep improves, your decisions get sharper. You don't need $1 million to enter phase 1. You need about 3,000. And almost nobody tells you that this is already a form of wealth, because it doesn't look like wealth. It looks like nothing, but the nothing is the point. Wealth isn't the moment money starts arriving. Wealth is the moment fear starts leaving. Phase 2 begins somewhere between $5,000 and $20,000. And what happens here is one of the most important psychological events in a person's entire financial life. In phase 1, you stopped flinching at small expenses. In phase 2, you stopped flinching at medium ones. The car needs new tires. You handle it. The dentist says you need a crown. You handle it. The flight home for the funeral. You handle it. You don't go into debt. You don't ask anyone for help. You just handle it. This is the phase where desperation begins to dissolve. Desperation is not an emotion. It's a state. It's what happens when your nervous system has lived for too long with no margin between you and disaster. It's what makes people stay in jobs that are slowly killing them. It's what makes people take payday loans at 400% interest. It's what makes people accept treatment from bosses, partners, family members they would never accept if they had a single other option. Desperation is the absence of options, and the absence of options is the absence of dignity. When you build a real emergency fund, 3 to 6 months of expenses, somewhere between $15,000 and $40,000 depending on your life, you are buying back your dignity. Behavioral economists have a name for what this fund creates. They call it optionality. The value of having a choice increases with uncertainty. And in a 2025 economy where the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported unemployment rising in 259 of the 387 largest American metros, where inflation continues to outpace wage growth for middle and lower income households, the optionality created by $20,000 in liquid savings is, mathematically, one of the most valuable assets a working person can possess. Here's the strange and beautiful thing. The people who reach this phase rarely use the fund to walk out. They build it. The emergency comes. They handle it. They rebuild. But they almost never use it to quit. Just having it is enough, because the moment you know you could leave, you stop needing to leave. The moment desperation lifts, your decisions stop coming from fear. And decisions that don't come from fear are almost always better decisions. There's a comment that appears under almost every financial video on the internet. Some version of the same sentence. I hate my job now. I used to like it until everyone else quit. Now I'm doing the work of 3 people for less money. He's not asking for advice. He's grieving. And what stands between him and walking away is almost never courage. It's a savings account. $20,000. That's the cost of his dignity. Not $1 million. $20,000. This is what phase 2 buys. Not luxury. Not status. Dignity. And dignity, once recovered, doesn't ever fully leave you again. If any of this has landed for you so far, hit the like button. It actually helps this kind of conversation reach people who need it. Let's keep going. Phase 3 begins when the emergency fund is built, the high-interest debt is paid down, and for the first time, there is leftover money. Not much, maybe a few hundred a month. But the key feature isn't the amount. The key feature is that the money is leftover. In behavioral economics, this is called slack. When people have zero slack, they live in what researchers call tunnel mode. The world narrows. The future shrinks. Long-term planning becomes physically painful. When margin enters your life, even a small amount, the tunnel begins to open. You start to notice things. Subscriptions billing you for years for stuff you don't use, the phone bill that's higher than it should be. The leak in your financial life was almost never income. It was attention. And here's where the math gets interesting in a way that almost nobody explains correctly. The S&P 500 over the last 100 years has produced an average annual return of approximately 10% before inflation and roughly 7% after inflation, with dividends reinvested. That's not a hypothetical. That's the actual record. A century of data spanning the Great Depression, the inflation crisis of the 70s, the dot-com crash, the 2008 financial crisis, and the pandemic. Through every one of those events, the long-term curve held. In Phase 3, when you start investing even small amounts into a low-cost broad index fund, you're not just saving. You're hiring. You're hiring a second worker who never sleeps and never asks for a raise. If you invest $500 a month for 30 years at the historical average of 7% after inflation, you end up with approximately $610,000 in today's purchasing power. From $500 a month. No raise required, no side hustle, just consistency. But here's the part most people miss. The worker you hired in Phase 3 is not the worker who's going to make you wealthy. The worker you hired in Phase 3 is the worker who's going to teach you how compounding feels before there's anything significant at stake. They're going to give you the muscle memory of leaving money invested when the market drops 20%. The muscle memory of doing nothing, which in investing is the most valuable skill there is. Because Dalbar, a financial research firm, has been tracking this for decades. They've found that the average individual investor significantly underperforms the very funds they invest in. The funds return 8 or 9% annualized. The average investor in those same funds returns 4 or 5. The gap is not because the funds are bad. It's because the investors panic. They sell at the bottom. They buy back at the top. The market is not the problem. The mind in front of the market is the problem. And this is why Phase 3 matters so much. It's your apprenticeship. The stakes are small enough that mistakes are survivable. You're not building wealth yet. You're building the only thing that will protect the wealth later. You're building character, patient, quiet, unimpressed by hype. The kind of person who watches their friends lose money on whatever the current shortcut is and feels not envy, but a quiet gratitude that they're not in it. That character, once formed, is worth more than the money it builds. Because most people who lose wealth don't lose it to bad luck. They lose it to themselves. Phase 3 is where the version of you who can hold wealth is built. The portfolio is just the receipt. The poor man pays for everything in attention. The rich man pays in money. And the freedom of the middle is the slow process of converting one into the other. So let's come back to where we started. You were told that financial freedom begins at $1 million, but we've just walked through 3 phases that happen long before that. 3 transformations that happen at 3,000, at 20,000, at 50,000. The first exhale, the recovery of dignity, the building of character. None of these phases trend on social media. None of them photograph well. There's no Lamborghini at $3,000. There's no Instagram moment at 20,000. There's no viral story at the first index fund deposit. But the people who walk through these 3 doors, quietly, often without telling anyone, are the people who, 20 years from now, find themselves standing in a place that the people who waited for $1 million never get to. That place isn't called rich. That place is called free. There's a comment that appears on financial videos all over the internet. It's usually from someone in their 50s or 60s. They write, "I made every mistake. I lost years. I had medical bills. I started over twice. And I still got here, late, slower than I wanted. But here." These are the most important comments in any thread because they puncture the central lie. The lie that if you don't do everything right early with no setbacks, the math won't work. The math is forgiving. Shockingly forgiving. You can start late. You can lose a decade. You can make every mistake. And you can still arrive somewhere dramatically better than where you started. The math doesn't care about your story. The math only cares about whether you keep contributing and stay in the game. And the staying in the game is mostly a psychological skill, not a financial one. If any of this landed for you, tell me in the comments which phase you're in right now. Not your number, not your salary, just the phase, the way it feels. Because someone scrolling this comment section a month from now is going to need to read what you write. They're going to need to see that they're not alone. In the next video, we go deeper. Because what comes after phase 3 is even stranger. It's the phase where the math starts to work in your favor, where the future stops being the enemy, where you do the rough math on the back of a napkin and realize, for the first time, it's actually going to work. That phase changes everything. If you don't want to miss it, subscribe. The next one is already on the way. You're closer than you've been told. I'll see you in the next one.